Boxing gossip here, guys, on a Saturday afternoon, and I wanted to do a video discussing the recent collaboration between David Haye and Richard Schaefer into Hayemaker Ringside Promotions, which seemingly is going to be a new promotional force in UK boxing. For you guys who saw the coverage on IFL TV yesterday, it appears that the two guys have formed this company with a view to making a serious crack at the UK boxing market and with an attempt to take on the main promoters, be that Eddie Hearn and Matchroom, or be that Frank Warren. During the press conference, it was made reference to the fact that the guys would be looking to work with terrestrial TV stations within the UK. At present, it's unclear who those terrestrial TV stations are. We know David Haye has worked with Dave before, although presumably this deal isn't with Dave because the way they were sort of talking about it yesterday kind of gave the implication of bigger and better things than that. So whether it's ITV, whether it's Channel 5, I guess these are very, very distinct possibilities. If I was a betting man, I'd maybe be inclined to think that they're going to be working with Channel 5, especially since it appears that Mick Hennessy's involvement with Channel 5 has come to a sort of close. And funnily enough, if you look back at that period of boxing, you know, Hennessy had Tyson Fury, who went on to be widely regarded as the #1 heavyweight on the planet. Hughie Fury, who appears to potentially be fighting for the world title in his very, very next fight. James DeGale, who most people would say is the #1 super middleweight in the world and obviously a world champion. And obviously Chris Eubank Jr., who, love him or hate him, is becoming one of the biggest names in British boxing. So I think there's an argument to say that that Channel 5 coverage, exposure and broadcast relationship certainly had a positive impact in one form on some of those guys' careers, and potentially David Haye will be looking at that and considering whether Channel 5 can add value to his future ambitions as a promoter. I've always thought that David Haye as a promoter was kind of half in, half out. For me, David Haye is a guy who is very, very keen on celebrity. We constantly see him living it up in Miami or on holiday if you follow David Haye on social media. And over the years, we've seen David Haye on various TV programs. He's done I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, you know, when they all go to the jungle, etc. So I kind of believe that being a boxing promoter, especially a promoter to rival Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, is very much a full-time gig. This is not a dip your toes into the market. This is not a, put a few hours in a week. It's a full-time job. And I've always suspected, because, David Haye's been giving it large about Hayemaker Promotions for many years. I've always suspected that Hayemaker Promotions was really a vehicle to promote David Haye and to be a self-promoted fighter. I've never really considered them as someone who could potentially rival the big two. Largely on the basis that I don't know if David Haye has the inclination to put the hours in to being a boxing promoter when there's so much other stuff going on in his celebrity life. Chilling with Jamie Foxx and Chris Eubank Jr. in Miami and at the UFC, etc. The interesting link up here is Richard Schaefer, because he is an individual who seems to be very, very highly regarded in the boxing world, obviously from his time with Oscar de la Hoya and Golden Boy Promotions. And for David Haye to be working with Richard Schaefer, for me, is an extremely mutually beneficial arrangement. For Richard Schaefer, he's obviously coming to a new market in the UK, and what better person to link up with than a guy like David Haye? Not only a fighter in his own right, who is going to be involved in potentially some of the biggest fights in 2017 and 2018, but also an individual who, as we've already discussed, does have that crossover celebrity type appeal. David Haye, when his name is associated with something in boxing, is going to create interest and is going to create hype. So from Richard Schaefer's perspective, I think this is a good deal. I think working with David Haye is a very, very easy route to market within the UK. Similarly, from David Haye's perspective, I think working with Richard Schaefer in the UK is a very, very good deal because it allows David Haye to be that figurehead, that celebrity figurehead who pops up at press conferences, etc. But then it also allows him to go off and train for fights and go on his holidays and do whatever David Haye gets up to. Whereas Richard Schaefer is probably the one who's going to be in the office grinding out the deals and that sort of thing. Now, understand that Richard Schaefer has signed Tony Yoka, the Olympic super heavyweight gold medalist who defeated Joe Joyce. That's obviously a very significant signing. From me sitting here, I'm unclear whether necessarily the newly formed company Hayemaker Ringside will have any dealings with Tony Yoka. I suspect not. My instinct is that that will be dealt with by a separate and distinct company, which is Ringstar, that belongs to Richard Schaefer, and that fighters will either be Richard Schaefer fighters or David Haye and Richard Schaefer fighters. I don't know the answer to that. That's just me speculating. So if you know better, please leave your comments in the section below. But it's interesting that they're targeting some big marquee fighters that they've talked about to work with this new promotional company. Now, in terms of who these fighters can be, I think look no further than the McGuigan Gym. George Groves is obviously a very big name, and we saw him fight on terrestrial TV recently. Carl Frampton is obviously a very big name, and he's in that gym as well. Then you've got a lot of up-and-coming talent, the likes of Josh Taylor, for example, who is widely regarded as one of the hottest prospects out there. I'm not sure if Andrew Selby's working with them. I might have got that wrong, but there's certainly some depth of talent in that McGuigan Gym. And clearly, if David Haye was able to promote shows, if he was able to promote a show headlined by David Haye with the likes of Carl Frampton or George Groves as the co-main event and Josh Taylor on the undercard, this is an event that would get boxing fans talking. The other thing to factor in, of course, is the David Haye Chris Eubank Jr. link. People who've been following their social media will know that the two have been spending a fairly elongated length of time together. I find it impossible to believe that David Haye didn't at least explore the possibility of working with Chris Eubank Jr., given that he was setting up a new promotional company and given that they've been spending so much time together. We also know that the Eubanks have recently started working with terrestrial TV with their link up with ITV. Could David Haye potentially have some involvement in that? I think it's an intriguing deal. I really think that the only way the Eubanks or Hayemaker Ringside can make a legitimate bid to rival the main two is if they sign fighters in bulk. Realistically, they need to be signing up 10 to 20 fighters of different levels, but some marquee names in there, because otherwise the matchroom machine that has big fights with world title fights on it on a monthly basis is just going to swamp you. Having said that, if the Haymakers and the Eubanks, etc., of this world, etc., can work on terrestrial TV, potentially it opens it up to a new market and to a new set of customers who don't pay for BT Sports or who don't pay for Sky or Box Nation. One thing I'm thinking about here is if you're a fighter who's currently a free agent, if you are, for example, a Carl Frampton, I'm unaware if Carl Frampton has a promotional deal set in stone. I know he works with the McGuigan's promotional company, but if you were a Carl Frampton, the competition in the market has to be a good thing. Carl Frampton knows he could rock up to Sky and probably turn himself into a pay-per-view fighter there. I'm sure he's aware that BT Sports, Box Nation and Frank Warren would very happily work with him. Now he's got all these new players in the market, so competition is a good thing. I also think that competition is a good thing for the public and not just the fighter. If you look at this Eubank Jr. bill coming up at the Olympia shortly, that was a bill that got much laughter about it initially, about how weak some of the fights were for the pay-per-view. It's actually stacked up to be a rather attractive bill. Chris Eubank Jr., love him or hate him, he's a good fighter to watch, let's be honest. David Price in a 50-50 fight on the undercard. John Ryder, Adam Etch is a real good 50-50 trade fight. Kid Galahad in a good fight. Andrew Selby on the card. Other young prospects like Chris Congo on the way up. It's actually turned in to be a good card. And it's cheaper as well. You can buy that pay-per-view for a tenner. next time Eddie Hearn puts out a pay-per-view at 17 quid or 20 quid or 25 quid, whatever it is, whatever they're going to be in future, people will be using the Eubank pay-per-view as a barometer. They'll be saying, you're charging twice as much as what Eubank charged, and they had all of these fights in the undercard, etc. So I think competition in general is a good thing. I think right now Frank Warren is obviously combing the market to look for talent, given that he's supposedly putting on 30 shows a year on BT Sports and Box Nation. I'm yet to see that materialise into an actual fight schedule, which I'd be fascinated to see. I think that needs to be done. But it's a very, very competitive time for boxing. And if I'm honest, the reason that it is so competitive, the reason Hayemaker, Ringside and that sort of stuff are actually entering the UK market, I have to say, is due to some of the success that Eddie Hearn's enjoyed in the last few years. Guys like Richard Schaefer are thinking that the UK is a really good place to come and bring business and promote, as opposed to focusing all their time in the States. So all in all, I think it's good for boxing. I think the next 3 months will be very revealing. Let's see, the calendar for the start of the year is very, very strong. Very strong, a calendar of big fights. Let's see Frank Warren announce his schedule of supposedly these 30 bills. I think that's going to be a fascinating addition. Chris Eubank Sr. has been talking about building a stable of fighters. David Haye's supposed to be announcing a terrestrial partner and launching a bid to sign numerous marquee fighters. So let's see what it all looks like in a few months. This is a fascinating time for UK boxing, and for me is a sign of life in the market. Let me know your thoughts, people. Do leave them in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this video, take the time to hit the thumbs up button. And as always, if you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. Many thanks indeed for watching.